The early 1990s were a time of outrageous mascots and over-the-top action, as developers vied to create characters that could rival Game's biggest names. Enter Battletoads, a trio of muscle-bound, trash-talking amphibians that hopped onto the scene in 1991 with a game as bold and unforgiving as their attitude. Developed by Rare, Battletoads combines colorful visuals, chaotic combat, and an infamously punishing difficulty level that left players both frustrated and determined to succeed. From battling rats in space to dodging obstacles on the turbo tunnel, Battletoads was an adrenaline-fueled ride that captured the spirit of the era and became a cult classic. Today, we're leaping into the history of the Battletoads series, exploring its creation, its notorious legacy, and how it continues to resonate with fans decades later. So grab your power fists, prepare for some pixelated punishment, and join us for today's radical trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 249th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are leaping into the world of the Battletoads series, which started with the 1991 beat-em-up that became legendary for its humor, outrageous design, and brutally difficult gameplay. Known for its creative levels and cooperative chaos, Battletoads remains a memorable piece of gaming history. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably spend more time crashing into walls than dodging obstacles in the turbo tunnel. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think that you can conquer the turbo tunnel? Have you conquered the turbo tunnel? Or do you just need a whole bunch of, extra lives to make it halfway?
Oh, I would have to get the extra lives all day.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
You ever played Battletoads before?
I've seen gameplay, but I never got a chance to play it myself. No one I knew growing up had it, and it's not one of the ones that I ever tried on an emulator.
So you've never played it, don't really know anyone else that's played it, but you've had the opportunity to see gameplay.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, that's fun.
How about yourself?
I absolutely hated this game.
Yeah, sounds right. I can understand that feeling.
I've played it. I could never get anywhere in it, so I did not like it. Because, it's no fun to play a video game that you can't actually get anywhere in. And
Yeah.
as you know, this is notoriously difficult, and it would have come out when I was 7. And
Bad at video games. Not that that's changed much, but still.
Thanks. Great. Love it. I don't know if I had the coordination for this when I was 7, roughly. So that's okay. A lot of people do like it. We'll talk more about that. But before I jump into the story of Battletoads, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during this week in gaming history?
Okay, kicking it off on June 1st, 1977, Nintendo released the Color TV game, marking one of the company's earliest ventures into the video game industry. This home video game console series included several models that were developed and sold exclusively in Japan, which is why our US audience might not know about them. The first model, Color TV Game 6, featured 6 variations of Light Tennis, which was a Pong clone that could be played directly on a television, utilizing simple dial controllers integrated into the hardware itself. The Color TV game series was a success, demonstrating Nintendo's capacity for innovation and setting the stage for its future as a major player in the global video game market. These early systems were fundamental in establishing Nintendo's reputation in the gaming industry long before the advent of their iconic characters and advanced gaming systems. We learned all about it and Nintendo's history back in episode 144, so if you want to learn more, you know where to go.
Our archives.
Yeah.
Episode 144.
Exactly. And if you didn't know, now you know.
Now you know.
Next up, on June 3rd, 1986, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels was released in Japan for the Famicom Disk System as the true sequel to the original Super Mario Bros. Designed for players who had mastered the first game, it introduced punishingly difficult level design, poison mushrooms, wind based platforming challenges, and backward warp zones. It also marked the first time Luigi was given unique mechanics. He could jump higher, but with less traction than Mario. Due to its extreme difficulty, Nintendo of America chose not to localize it at the time, instead releasing a modified version of Doki Doki Panic as Super Mario Bros. 2 in the West. Eventually, the game was introduced to international audiences as the Lost Levels in Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES in 1993, and has since become a cult favorite known for its role in reprising the hardcore Kaizo Mario scene.
Doki Doki Panic.
Panic indeed.
We got the weird version of Super Mario 2 that makes no sense to anyone.
Nah, no, but that's part of the fun.
It really is.
Next up, on June 6, 1993, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening was released for the Game Boy, marking a significant moment in the Legend of Zelda series as the first of the portable installments. Developed and published by Nintendo, the game features Link as he finds himself stranded on the mysterious Goholand Island, filled with fantastical creatures and puzzling dungeons. Unlike other Zelda games that occur in the Kingdom of Hyrule, Link's Awakening takes place in a distant setting with a standalone story, where Link must awaken the mythical windfish to escape the island. The game retained the series' classic top-down adventure gameplay, while introducing new mechanics and features that were adapted for the handheld format. Link's Awakening was praised for its deep story, charming graphics, and innovative gameplay that not only made full use of the Game Boy's capabilities, but also set a high standard for future portable Zelda titles. Its critical and commercial success led to a color re-release for the Game Boy Color as Link's Awakening DX in 1998, and a full remake for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. Next up, on June 1st, 2004, Full Spectrum Warrior was released for the Xbox, offering a unique blend of real-time tactics and military simulation. Developed by Pandemic Studios in collaboration with the U.S. Army's Institute for Creative Technologies, the game was initially conceived as a training tool to teach squad-level tactics and decision-making in urban combat scenarios. Players assumed the role of two fire teams, Alpha and Bravo, issuing orders through a cursor-based interface rather than direct control, emphasizing the importance of cover, suppressive fire, and coordinated maneuvers. Set in the fictional Middle Eastern nation of Zekistan, the narrative follows U.S. forces as they engage in operations to dismantle a hostile regime. Full Spectrum Warrior was lauded for its realistic portrayal of infantry tactics and innovative gameplay mechanics, earning accolades such as Best Original Game and Best Simulation Game. Last up for this week in gaming history, on June 2015, Heroes of the Storm officially launched on Windows and Mac OS, marking Blizzard Entertainment's entry into the multiplayer online battle arena, or MOBA, as you may have learned in last week's episode, genre. And if you didn't learn that, go listen to last week's episode. Maybe you'll learn about what a MOBA is.
Maybe you will.
Branded as a hero brawler, the game brought together iconic characters from Blizzard's franchises, Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, and later Overwatch, into fast-paced team-based battles. Unlike traditional MOBAs, Heroes of the Storm emphasized streamlined gameplay with shared team experience, diverse battleground objectives, and a focus on cooperative strategies. At launch, the game featured over 30 playable heroes and 7 unique backgrounds, each with distinct mechanics to influence match outcomes. The release followed an open beta that began on May 19, 2015, and was celebrated with a live stream event in London on June 1st, highlighting Blizzard's commitment to fostering a vibrant community around the game. If you're curious to learn about the MOBA genre, like I said, go to last week's when we talked about Defense of the Ancients and learn more.
You can learn all about it.
Yeah, learn about Dota and the MOBA and all the other buzz. Speaking of it's time for our next topic.
Not really our next topic, because I feel like we've been visiting this topic a bunch lately. We're revisiting the fabled British video game developer Rare today which
Well,
we
that's a rare
literally,
thing.
not in this case. We literally just talked about it a few weeks ago when we covered Perfect Dark, which they also made.
Oh.
Their 2000 first-person shooter, their spiritual successor to GoldenEye, that we covered the development of it. And we've done other episodes on them before, other than the Perfect Dark. We've covered GoldenEye. We've covered Conker's Bad Fur Day. I'm sure there's others. Donkey Kong Country's in the mix too. That's when they made it big, as far as I'm concerned. No, that's not true. Anyway, there's a lot of content in our archives where you can learn more about specific pieces of Rare's history if you'd like. Our topic today, though, was really created by the founders of Rare. And we've talked a lot about the company, but I think I want to go back and talk about the founders specifically, kind of to give you a basis. And that would be a pair of brothers, Chris and Tim Stamper. And basically, Chris started out in the gaming industry working on arcade conversions for a college friend and convinced Tim to come work with him. So really, they got their start doing arcade conversions. When instead of making a whole new cabinet, a company would create a new motherboard that could be put in the arcade that would, change it to a completely different game, which would be a lot cheaper. They used to do that a lot, reuse the cabinets that way. New art, new motherboard, new chips, things like that. In 1982, they decided to start their own company, which would eventually become known as Ultimate Play the Game. And although Ultimate started out licensing arcade conversion kits, they continued that work. It wasn't long before they decided to move into developing games for the home computer market. Chris programmed the games while Tim designed the graphics, so they kind of had a little division of labor there. And in the mid 80s, Ultimate had a string of hits. There was Jetpack and Saberwolf and Night Lore. And these hits helped it become one of the largest UK based video game development companies. But the platform they developed for, which was the ZX Spectrum, was really only popular in the UK. So they understood that they would have to broaden their horizons in order to grow. Now, that's not to say their games didn't end up on other platforms. They kind of had this notion where they wanted to focus on making games and focus on being better at the games they made. So they would make the game and then, there'd be other companies that would port it elsewhere. But they really, like I said, they really struggled to break out of the British video game market at the time. Meanwhile, while through their Japanese arcade contacts that they inevitably made working on arcade conversions, they had heard about Nintendo's new console, and they managed to get one imported to them in the UK. And in the Nintendo Famicom, they saw the future. We've kind of talked about this over and over again. Instead of the computer in the console, they saw more sophisticated technology than the Spectrum had. They saw cartridges that had virtually no load times, and they saw in its design and superiority a mass appeal that would allow it to break into a worldwide market differently than the computers did. Because remember, they had the ZX Spectrum there, but here on stateside, we would have the Commodore or the Atari and so on and so forth. But in the Famicom, they could see it being sold globally. And so this inspired them to want to focus their development on the Nintendo Famicom platform. Because of this, they decided to start another company just to do that. It was going to be called Rare Designs of the Future. They founded it in 1985 with the sole purpose of developing games for the Nintendo Famicom. There was one problem with the situation. They had already been rebuked by Nintendo. When Ultimate was first getting started, they had reached out and they tried to develop a relationship on the arcade side of the business, but Nintendo wouldn't bite. So for this go around, the team at what would inevitably be known as just simply Rare decided to take a different approach. For 6 months, Chris studied the Nintendo Famicom and he reverse engineered it. Nintendo was out there spread into the world that there was no possible way that anyone could reverse engineer our system. It was locked down tight. You got to get the development kits from us. You got to get the licensing from us. There's no way around it. So they were incredibly surprised when the Rare team scheduled a meeting with the Nintendo of America executive Arakawa, and they showed him several tech demos running on their hardware. And that was a gamble, of course. That was a risky gamble because depending on how Nintendo was going to look at that, was going to define the relationship going forward, right?
Absolutely.
Because
You
they
never know when you
basically,
you just hijack someone's hardware like that.
nope, and basically they just called Nintendo out on their BS, right? I mean,
Oh,
straight up.
absolutely.
Oh, we can't reverse engineer the system? Guess again.
Yeah, it's pretty ballsy. But did it pay out?
It paid out. Nintendo was incredibly impressed that they were able to figure out their system without, you know, Nintendo's help, so to speak. And so they offered to form a relationship. Actually, they pretty much offered to give them a limited budget to build and develop future projects on the Nintendo Famicom platform. So, because of that, Rare was one of the probably the first Western third party developer for Nintendo ever.
Pretty impressive.
It is incredibly impressive. The first project they worked on for the Nintendo Famicom is a downhill skiing game called Slalom, and that sold about 500,000 copies. And it wasn't long before Rare developed a game for the Famicom that would sell over 1,000,000 copies. It's its third game developed on the platform, which was a racing game titled RC Pro AM that would go on to sell about 2.3 million copies worldwide. And the title in the middle, Wizards and Warriors, didn't do too shabby itself. That became a whole series, on its own. So, really, Rare got into Famicom development and they just kind of went at it and started being successful at it right from the get go. So when RC Pro AM, phenomenal racing game by the way, I played the heck out of some RC Pro AM. When RC Pro AM won or sold 2.3 million copies, that absolutely put Rare on the map. And suddenly everybody wanted to work with them. Now, we've talked about this recently, you know, but that began an absolutely prolific period in which Rare began to work with various publishers to produce 60 games over a 5-year period, 47 of which were for the Nintendo Entertainment System. They worked with Game Tech to develop video game versions of everyone's favorite game shows like Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Hollywood Squares, Double Dare. Love me some Double Dare.
Oh, do
Little,
you now?
little Nickelodeon action there. They worked with Acclaim to bring WWF WrestleMania to the platform, and Acclaim was the publisher of the Wizard and Warrior series. With Milton Bradley, they got Marble Madness and California Games, Captain Skyhawk, among others. They brought Sesame Street to the NES, Who Framed Roger Rabbit to the NES, Spider-Man, Freddy Krueger. There was a Nightmare on Elm Street that Rare developed, and a Beetlejuice game that Rare developed. So Rare was an absolute powerhouse in the development world when it came to the 8-bit era, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while this is all happening, there are two comic book authors who came together somewhere in New Hampshire was a New England state, and they came up with a new comic book series that was meant to be a parody on common superhero tropes. It All started when one of them drew a masked turtle standing on its hind legs while armed with nunchucks in order just to make the other one laugh. This, of course, sounds familiar because it turned into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if you'd like to learn all about their origin, we covered their story way back in episode 100. We learned about where the turtles themselves came from, and we talked about some of the turtle games in the series because we're big turtle fans. So, video game. Are we turtle cartoon fans? I haven't watched a turtle cartoon in a long time. Have you?
I have not, but I also didn't grow up when it was really big, so it was
True.
mostly just the games for
Yeah,
me.
true statement. And I grew up when it was on TV every single day of the week.
Exactly.
It was 1987, speaking of, when the creators licensed the Turtles for merchandising, and they worked to create the first Turtles animated series. I think the comic book started in 84, and then the animated series started in 87. December of 87 to be exact. And within a year, it was being played in syndication on Saturday mornings. And then by September of 1989, a year after that, it was expanded to 5 days a week, and it began airing in weekday syndication in pretty much every television market. So I'm not joking when I said it was on pretty much every day. it it went from a Saturday morning cartoon to a when you got home from school cartoon, which I'm sad I don't think is a thing for kids anymore. So we used to come home to cartoons every day. It was great. And we'd wake up in the morning and eat breakfast to cartoons. It was great. I guess with streaming, it doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I guess you're right. You can play cartoons whenever you want now. In 1990, the Turtles franchise released an animated feature movie, and it broke the record for highest grossing independent film at the time. It sold, I don't know, over $200 million, which was a big deal in 1990. I mean, to be the highest grossing independent film, that can't be that shabby, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The Turtles were definitely an instant hit, and Turtle Mania was in full swing. When the merchandising began to trickle into stores, the movie came out, so on and so forth, it was Konami that won the rights to create the very first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle video game. And so there were other companies looking to capitalize on the turtle craze, and Rare was no different, but of course, they couldn't use the turtle characters. So what do you do when that happens, Rob?
You make a different kind of animal.
That's exactly right. You come up with your own series in an attempt to capitalize on the popularity of the turtles. We've heard that before, where, one game, in terms of video game history, roughly, where one game gets incredibly popular, then every other video game development company has to jump on the bandwagon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, the team at Rare was interested in money. We say that all the time because more money, right? And they wanted to create a new intellectual property that they could merchandise on the same level as a major franchise. They saw the popularity of the Turtles, and also this was about the time that Tim Burton's Batman had been released in theater. And so the team was looking at all the Tim Burton the Batman merchandise in particular. There were Batman bed sheets and Batman posters, Batman action figures. And so they saw the Turtles and the Batman stuff, and they were thinking to themselves, man, how can we get in on this action? You know?
Right. I agree.
So they designed their own characters. Three frogs who can fight with this in mind. Frogs are amphibians, like the turtles are, and three sassy amphibians should have the ability to compete with the turtles and have mass appeal, right?
Right.
Because everybody wants more money.
Yeah, can you blame them?
Nope, not at all. Also, this is about the time when there was a gross out culture, so to speak, that was becoming a thing for children. In its simple form, Nintendo had its gross slime, which was everywhere, burping, farting. Humor was becoming more crude. The Simpsons, This is about when the Simpsons started to get into it, and that's more crude humor, to be fair, right? So, gross out culture was becoming a thing. And so that was kept in mind when the team chose the names for the three frogs with an attitude, whose names are Pimple, Zitz, and Rash. Everything about the Battletoads was about taking what was already established with the Turtles, so to speak, and making it more edgy. And at one point, even the title was going to reflect this because they once considered calling the game Amphibians with a Z as the title.
Oh, fancy the Z.
Even its art style, which ended up being cartoony and over the top, was chosen to separate themselves further from all the other beat 'em up franchises and to give them more appeal by making them so different from everyone else. And this isn't really where they started, because interestingly enough, when they first conceived Battletoads, it was going to be a more Disney style video game in its art style and tone. But as they went on, the game got more violent, and you couple that with the fact that the animators have flat out admitted, we're not Disney animators. We don't know how to replicate that style. And so, with these things in mind, they pulled away from the Disney style idea and progressed into the extreme edginess that the Battletoads has at the moment. And there were other ways that the team wanted to separate themselves from the other beat 'em ups of the time. Then the stages. There are stages that they developed that aren't typical for beat 'em up, like climbing courses that go vertical. There are racing stages of various kinds. I there's a stage in there where you have to climb up a snake, like literally from the game Snake. Like it goes your level, and you got to time your jumps to go from snake to. It's cool. And of course, we have to talk about its difficulty. Battletoads is famously known as one of the most difficult games ever created. Always goes on the list of most difficult games of all time. Granted, there's more difficult games now, we could argue. But at the time, I mean, it was probably one of the hardest games ever created. And like I said, I know as a kid, I hated it. I couldn't get anywhere. I think I could get to the second or third level. I couldn't get past that. And so it wasn't very much fun to me. Now, according to Rare artist Kevin Bayliss, in an interview found on the Rare Replay collection, the game was made intentionally hard to increase its longevity. And that makes sense because games were notoriously short in that era, especially compared to now. Even with Battletoads difficulty, you can go online and watch a full walkthrough of the game on YouTube, which I did, and it's only, I think it's 41 or 42 minutes long. I looked up Arcus's speed run, and he's got 35 minutes on this game. So,
Jeez.
35 to 45 minutes is the length of this game. He did add, Kevin Bayliss, as a funny anecdote, that while working on this game, he frequently heard the team's programmer, Mark Betteridge, scream in anger when he was frustrated and unable to complete the levels that he himself had put together.
Wow.
So even the programming team was frustrated with this. Interestingly enough, speaking to the difficulty, as they began to port this title over to other platforms, they pretty much had to tone the difficulty down for just about every other version of the game. Even the localized version, the European and the Japanese version of these games were tweaked to make them easier. So, literally, the original version, the United States version, is the most difficult version of that game that's out there. But they did finish it. All difficulty aside, the team managed to finish development on Battletoads, and they released it in June of 1991 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Rob, every time we visit Rare's history, I'm reminded how fearless they were, reverse engineering the Famicom, creating original IPs to rival Ninja Turtles, and making games like Battletoads that dared to be absolutely punishing.
Yeah, they really didn't hold back. I mean, who else would look at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and think, let's top that with frogs named Zitz, Rash, and Pimple? and then crank the difficulty to 11 just to mess with kids like us.
Exactly. But it's that same bold spirit, taking risks, building something from scratch, that reminds me a lot of the podcasting world. And if you're thinking about starting your own show, there's a tool that makes it way easier than reverse engineering a Famicom in Zencaster.
Oh, yeah, Zencaster. No soldering iron required for that, right?
None at all. Zencaster is an all in one platform that lets you record high quality audio and video right from your browser. Whether you're collaborating with guests across the country or just chatting with your co host about retro games, it's quick, it's clean, and it's simple.
Yeah, but what about the editing? I remember when we were editing early episodes of the show, and you'd say that it was about as fun as the turbo tunnel on your first try.
I totally get that. I remember. Zencaster's built in post production tools do the hard work for you. They level your audio, clean up the background noise, and they remove filler words. It's like having your own development team smoothing out the rough edges.
Okay, but once it's done, boom, you just publish right to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else people listen?
Yeah, right from your dashboard. It's as easy as pressing start.
All right, I guess I'm in. How can our listeners give it a try with me?
Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code all one word memory card lane. You'll get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're launching a new podcast or leveling up your current one, Zencaster has you covered.
So, listeners, if you're ready to create something awesome, maybe not quite as rage inducing as Battletoads, but just as memorable, Zencasters got your back.
Well, Battletoads never reached the popularity of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. People still liked Battletoads, and that was enough to convince Rare to continue to develop in that universe. Like I said, it was ported to other platforms. The original Battletoads made it to the Sega Genesis, it made it to the Sega Game Gear, and it made it to the Amiga platform as well. And really, the original Battletoads, for those of you that don't know, is a I'd say it's side scrolling, but it goes vertical and side to side, so it's not really side scrolling. It's just a beat 'em up platform game. And basically you have these three space humanoid frogs that form a group known as the Battletoads, and two of the Battletoads, who are Rash and Zitz, have to go on a mission to defeat the evil Dark Queen on her planet, and they have to rescue basically their kidnapped friends. Pimple, the third Battletoad, and their Princess Angelica, are basically kidnapped. So it's the two of them who have to, rescue the princess and whatchamacallit. Yeah, man, like I said, the thing I remember the most about it is just it was so hard. It was so hard.
Growing up, I remember that this was the game to talk about that you were good that you could beat. If you were good at games, you could beat Battletoads. It was, as far as I know, the hardest game for the NES. That's what I grew up knowing, and if that's not true, well, that's going to shatter my whole worldview of the NES system, which is kind of redundant.
I think it's between this and Ghosts and Goblins, to be fair. So
Yeah,
those
and
would.
I've heard that as well. So, it's one of those ones. I'm not surprised to hear that you struggled with it. Obviously, I never tried it. But I'm sure that even still I would have difficulties with it. So, it's, if anything, it may not have been as popular as TMNT, but it's definitely just as infamous.
It is. I mean, and look, when it was released, it it did good. I mean, it obviously didn't do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles good, right?
Right.
But it did good. It Let's see, started out number 26 on Nintendo Power's top 30 list of NES games, and I think it maxed out at 11. So I mean, it was always a middle of the tier game, but it did win awards for the 1991 Nintendo Power Awards. It won graphics and sound, best theme and fun, best blade control, and best multiplayer. Oh, and it was given the title of overall best game for the NES of '91. So, I mean, Nintendo Power thought it was the best game made for their own platform for the whole of 1991. It was a good game. I mean, they made a good game. Technologically, it plays good and it looks good. When you have a game, that's probably one of my favorite things about this, to be fair, before we move on to the rest of the series. You can't make a game this difficult without making it well. Or maybe you can, but they didn't in this case, because what makes it very hard in a lot of it is it has, for me in particular, it has these vehicle levels that are like you have to dodge things that are coming at you, and there are these really long sections that you have to basically like memorize the patterns. Is the wall coming up top or on the bottom? Like here's a ramp I have to jump. Is the ramp on the top? And you got to memorize, like, as they're zooming and they're zooming fast. They're zooming at you really fast. So you got to learn the muscle memory and the the patterns and so on and so forth. But if the game wasn't responsive, if they didn't do a good job of that, people wouldn't have liked it as much as they did. If that makes sense. Let's see. Battletoads original comes out in June of 1991. And later that year, in December of 1991, there is a Game Boy version of the game that's released. And admittedly, this one was a little deceiving because it shares the same cover as the NES game. So you would expect it to be the same game, right?
Right.
I mean, that makes sense. If you looked at a console and a handheld version of the game, and they are identical boxes other than the platform, would you not expect them to be the same game?
I probably would. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there was any situation where I wouldn't, but when you look side by side, even if it's just you think it's a port of anything, if anything.
Yeah, and a port implies kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, when they released Battletoads for the Game Boy in 1991 in December, it is not the same game. It has unique levels. It doesn't follow the order or the plot of the NES one. I Who knows? Who knows why they didn't decide to give it a different title or give it a different box art. I don't care about the title because you're right. When you port things from console to handheld, the title you can't get the same game on you can't get the same game on a handheld platform, right?
Right.
So I'm not worried about that. I think what I find so weird about this is that they didn't change the box art at all. I don't know why, but for me, that's the thing. And then it even kind of gets worse because in 1993, they did bring the NES version to the Game Boy platform, and they called it Battletoads in Ragnarok's World with a different title and cover.
Interesting.
That's what I'm saying. Like, why? Why if they could port, like, why they make a different game and not do anything different and then make the same game with a different title? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
Exactly. Who knows? When the Super Nintendo became a thing, the no doubt Rare brought the Battletoads over to the Super Nintendo. We know that they were developing for Super Nintendo in Donkey Kong Country. I did a whole episode on that. And that game is called Battletoads and Battle Maniacs. And again, same premise. Two Battletoads are on a quest to stop the Dark Queen, and I think there's a new bad guy named Silas something. This was a lot of fan service. Its levels are very much enhanced or remixed versions of the original Battletoads, so it plays similarly. So fans really liked it. Of course, it looked better because now we're on Super Nintendo, and it's not the same. Played exactly the same. They updated some of the moves and stuff like that. And about the same time that they did Battletoads and Battle Maniacs, they released Battletoads slash Double Dragon, which is also known as Battletoads and Double Dragon: The Ultimate Team. Now, Obviously, we've never done an episode on them before, but on one hand, you have Technos Japan's Double Dragon series. On the other hand, you have Rare's Battletoads series. These are two very well known side scrollum beat 'em up series at the time, and they were very popular at the time. And so they brought the two together, hoping to capitalize on that. It is an NES title. Well, it became an NES or SNES title. This one ended up coming out for, I think, Sega Genesis, SNES, and NES. But essentially, what happens is the Dark Queen, the Battletoads nemesis, partners up with the Shadow Clan, who are Double Dragon's nemesis, and then all of the teams go on the hunt to defeat both their nemesis together. And given the popularity of these two popular beat 'em up series at the time, it was very much it just made sense to bring them together. I don't know any way to put it. It made sense to bring them together.
No, it makes sense.
So, um, Rare made this. They got the Double Dragon license from Technos Japan. Rare didn't get much feedback from the Double Dragon people, so it's pretty much a Rare and a Battletoads game. And yeah, it is. It rated well. We talked about how the original Battletoads was the seen as the best overall game in 1991 on the NES. This was rated as the second best overall game of the entire year on the NES. It would have been 93, so that means it would have been up against Super Mario Brothers 3. Thank God it's the second best. So, yeah, and Battletoads Double Dragon tackled both franchises, and it did an absolute great job. Absolute great job at it. The following year, in 1994, Rare teamed up with Electronic Arts as a publisher, and they created an arcade cabinet based on the Battletoads franchise. And this gave them the freedom to do some things that they hadn't done before because it wasn't intended to be in homes. They took greater liberties with the violence and the gore. It actually, Battletoads Arcade was Rare's first game to ever use the 3D technology that they later popularized in Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct. So it was kind of a testing ground for all the things that made them a bigger company shortly, right? And
Right.
and really with the arcade and the more technology, like they were able to push the envelope on everything, not just gore and violence, but it's better graphics and the moves are more outrageous and the story is more outrageous and pretty much everything about it was bigger and better than all the home console versions because again, being an arcade cabinet and not a home console meant, especially since they worked solely with Nintendo for the most part, right? I mean, they did Genesis, but Nintendo was their bread and butter. And we know how Nintendo felt about gore and violence on their platform. So they toned it. It also had voiceovers. And they did something unique in this one in that they rebalanced all three characters. So in most of the Battletoads, all the three characters play very similarly, but in the arcade version, which is literally called Battletoads Arcade, each player has a unique role. Rash is smaller and more nimble. Pimple is a powerhouse, and Zitz is kind of a balance of the two. And in most of the early Battletoads, you really couldn't pick your character. Player number one, I can't remember which is which, but player number one would be a specific member of the team, and player number two was a specific member of the team. But in the arcade cabinet, you could pick, which is why they rebalanced and kind of gave players the ability to play in whatever play style they wanted to, right?
Right.
So, and then we didn't see anything Battletoads for a long, long while. 20 years roughly. And then as it stands in 2015, Rare releases the Rare Replay Collection, which we talked about a few weeks ago in our Perfect Dark episode as well. And that's a collection of about 30 or so old Rare games that were all emulated for modern consoles. It came out on the Xbox One and Windows at the time, and now, of course, you can play it because Xbox One. In fact, I think Rare Replay is a Game Pass game now that Rare is owned by Microsoft. Don't quote me on that. I didn't look that one up.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that one myself.
But in the Rare Replay collection, you can play the original Battletoads, or you can play Battletoads Arcade. They put those two titles in the collection. And then, finally, in 2020, we got the first new title in the Battletoads franchise after 26 years. It is Battletoads. I don't know any other way to put it. It's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. Has the same story. Got to rescue your partners. Uh, it's modernized graphics, but it's definitely Battletoads. It's not as hard as the original by any stretch of the imagination. Nothing is as hard as the original. Um, but if you're curious about that, you can play it on Windows and Xbox. Like I said, it might even be a Game Pass game because Microsoft owns Rare now, which we kind of talked about recently too.
Yeah, crazy when you think about that, but it's a good thing that they've gotten it and are hopefully doing what they can to keep it up and running.
Well, I think if you play the Rare collection, it's got all those fun little features that modern emulators have, like the ability to rewind time, save states, so you save your game in the exact state. I also think you can like change it to where you get unlimited lives or continues. So if you play the new ones, if you go back and you play them emulated on the Rare collection, much easier. Should be able to get
Gotcha.
through it. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Let's remember that Battletoads was made to directly compete with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and if the world today is any indication, it's fairly obvious that they did not. But in the same way that the Turtles made it big when they published a cartoon and it went into syndication, you should know that the Battletoads attempted to do the same thing. There is out there a roughly half hour, not even, animated television special that was made in order to achieve that same end, and it was only picked up for a special shown on Thanksgiving weekend of 1992. It was produced with the hopes that someone would see it and pick it up, like the Turtles got picked up for full time syndication, but no one ever did. So all we have of Battletoads outside of the video games is a 22-minute animated special that's somewhere out in the world. And other than strategy guides, no one's bothered to write books or stories or anything that I'm aware of. Although Rule 34 dictates that there's probably definitely fan fiction out there. So, Rare tried, and I'm not going to say that they failed, but unlike so many of their other games that have found renowned success, like GoldenEye, like Perfect Dark, like Donkey Kong Country, I would say even its most recent success, Sea of Thieves, Battletoads just didn't capture the public's imagination the way they had hoped. But, with that being said, there are enough of us that wax poetic with nostalgia over its difficulty that have allowed it to remain in the culture consciousness, and therefore, it's a cult classic. And that, my friends, is the story of Battletoads. Now, like I said, lots of other games that Rare has done. We've done episodes on GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong Country, Conker's Bad Fur Day. A lot of really great stories in Rare's history. And of course, if you want to check any of them out, I would suggest going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics, know what we're going to be talking about, and see if it's your favorite game or subject coming up in oncoming weeks. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics or maybe anything else gaming related. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a console, a technology, a place, just something that I find relevant to this week in gaming history. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Every week, when we sit down to research a new topic, we learn things. And whenever I excitedly learn something new, I get excited to teach you guys, our listeners, in this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in celebration of it, we like to talk about what we've taken away every week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think my favorite takeaway from today's episode is that Mark Betteridge, one of the team's programmers, was having just as much fun with this game as you did when you were growing up, Dave. So it's nice to know that not only did the people who played the game on the release have a fantastic time, but so did the guy who programmed it. So, that's when a game is damn good, when you design it and can't even beat it yourself.
Yeah, them are facts. Them are facts for sure.
It just makes me laugh. It's like people who make those with Super Mario Maker. They make their own stage and can never beat it, and they're like, "Oh, it's the hardest stage ever." Well, yeah, because you can't. It's not possible to beat, you know.
Yeah,
But then someone does it because they're just better than you. That's the way it always goes.
yeah, facts.
So that's my big takeaway. That's my favorite little factoid. What about yourself?
Amphibians. I like the fact that they thought this was going to be more edgy, and they were going to call this amphibians. And I think it would be, not that it's not now, but I think had they called it amphibians, it would be laughably a relic of the '90s at this point, because everything with a Z is a relic of the '90s. Uh, and I think that would have hampered its popularity personally. Um,
You say that you got to remember that even me and my friends in our late 20s were still putting Z's on things. I mean, come on.
okay, all right.
Everyone from our podcast early days remembers Fat Boy Rips with a Z.
True statement. Yeah, yeah, that's a true statement. Maybe I'm wrong. I think amphibians is a fun, edgy name, but I'm glad they went with Battletoads.
I
So
mean, it seems more fitting than amphibians because I would have thought it was just a game about a bunch of frogs swimming around.
the Kevin Bayless, the art guy that gave the anecdote, also said that at one point after the original Battletoads, they were looking at making a kind of more mature version of the game called War Frogs,
Nice.
and it never came to fruition. So
That one would have been cool too.
that one would have been cool. All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here and into next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take a moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. It means the world to us that you listen each week as we talk about sometimes impossible to beat games and sometimes just the technology that went out to create them. So we hope you enjoy listening. We hope you continue to listen. We hope you check out some of our old episodes at the website that Dave and I plugged earlier. And we'll catch you next time.
Absolutely. As we leap away from the chaotic world of Battletoads, we're reminded of how its colorful characters and challenging gameplay captured the bold spirit of the early 1990s. Rare's amphibian trio brought humor and adrenaline to gaming, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. So, whether you're tackling impossible levels or embracing a challenge, always remember the charm of one of gaming's wildest adventures. Next week, though, we're setting aside the radical reptiles of Battletoads and diving headfirst into one of gaming's most infamous tales of ambition and chaos. From its announcement in 1997 to its release in 2011, Duke Nukem Forever endured over a decade of delays, technological shifts, and controversies, becoming a symbol of what can go wrong in game development. So grab your bubblegum, avoid any development hell of your own, and join us for next week's delayed trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibbity bop 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 bop. Woo!